Welcome to Capitol View on WSIU. I'm Brian Sapp. The General Assembly continues their work as the end of the session quickly approaches. One of the topics revolves around data centers, their energy and water use, as well as tax breaks for their development. And with the midterm elections looming, the Illinois Republican Party picked a new state chairman this week. Joining us to talk about these topics and more are Kent Redfield. He's a political scientist, professor emeritus at the University of Illinois Springfield, and Dan Petrella. He's a reporter with the Chicago Tribune. Kent and Dan, welcome to the program. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Happy to join you.
So we're going to wait on the General Assembly for a little bit, and we're going to talk about the big news, I guess, in Republican circles here in the state. We haven't talked a lot about them the past few weeks. On Monday, they had their election, and Kathy Salvi, the previous GOP chair in the state, was replaced by Bob Gorgan. Dan, can you start us off? Tell us a little bit about the election and maybe what this means.
Yeah, so Bob Gorgan was the DuPage County auditor for 3 terms, starting in 2008, and then lost a very close race in 2020 to a Democrat by 75 votes. And it's an interesting selection. You know, it's someone from DuPage County, which historically was the heart of the Republican Party in the state of Illinois, but a place where Republicans have really seen a fall off in voter support over the last decade plus. Corresponding to the rise of Barack Obama in 2008 and then Donald Trump's entrance into politics in 2016. So, Kathy Salvi served just under 2 years. She replaced current Illinois GOP U.S. Senate nominee Don Tracy as the chair, who was sort of pushed aside for not being sufficiently to the right enough for some folks within the party. So, it's going to be really interesting to see if Gorgan is able to take the party in a different direction, bring it back to a little bit more relevance, particularly in suburban Cook County and the Collar counties. It's a really tough situation. I think what's interesting to me about the last few chairs that they've selected for the party is they're choosing folks who don't really have experience with winning statewide elections. Kathy Salvi lost a U.S. Senate race to Tammy Duckworth in 2022 by 15 points. Bob Gorgan's statewide race was a GOP primary back in 2014 for state treasurer that he lost by about 15 percentage points. So, it's interesting strategy choosing folks who have not performed particularly well when they have run in some of these high-profile races to lead the party. And I'm interested to see what the strategy is there, if they have any new approach to appeal to the 6 million or so voters in suburban Cook County and the Collar counties. My math might be a little off there, but off the top of my head, it's a good chunk of the electorate here in the state of Illinois. It's really where elections, statewide elections in particular, are decided. And it's going to be a very tough year for Republicans up and down the ballot, I think, particularly if gas is still $5 a gallon when we head to the polls in November, or potentially even more expensive. We see President Trump, who already is very unpopular in the suburbs of Chicago, with historically low approval ratings. So, midterms are always tough for the party in power, particularly if the figurehead of their party is not popular with voters. So it'll be interesting to see if Gorgan is able to take the Illinois GOP in a new direction or find ways to appeal to suburban moderates and swing voters and the like.
Yeah, there's a whole series of problems here. One of them is, if you don't have a farm team, if you can't get somebody elected treasurer, secretary of state, get some order to the U.S. Senate. And so, I guess they could go back and figure out who ran Bruce Rauner's campaign in 2014. But it's that's really a problem. The demographic shift that took place between 1990 and 2010, huge influx of Hispanics, to a lesser extent Asians, into suburban Cook, the Collar counties. There were about 1 million fewer Caucasians in that area at the end of those 20 years, and about 1.3 million more voters of different, racial minorities. And so, huge demographic shift. Uh, you also have the problem of with that demographic shift and the candidates the Republicans have been running, you're losing the suburbs on social issues, gay rights, abortion, those kinds of issues. And so we look at the last governor's race, and if the Democratic candidate wins easily, overwhelmingly in suburban Cook as well as Chicago and carries the suburbs, then you get a situation where Bailey had 500,000 vote lead coming out of downstate and lost by 300,000 votes. So it is a very difficult problem. The other leg of this, or part of this, is the Republican funding base has collapsed. We don't have the manufacturing that we used to have. The physicians used to be the primary health group in terms of influencing elections. Now it is hospitals, nursing homes, health facilities, and then the unions are dominant in terms of raising money. And while the teachers' unions get a lot of attention, it's really the trade unions, the laborers, the engineers, those groups that are really the biggest funders of Illinois politics. And you put a gerrymander on top of that, and we have a brutal partisan gerrymander both in the legislature and in congressional races. And it is a pretty thankless task to say I'm going to bring back the Republican Party. There may be a point which the Democrats people figure out that having a Democrats in power over a long period of time doesn't seem to be solving problems, but I don't know that you're going to do it with a Southern Illinois socially conservative candidate to kind of turn this around. So it's not a happy picture. Nothing is forever in politics, but right now it's a pretty thankless task to be chair of the statewide Republican Party.
Yeah, it's not that long ago that we had a Republican governor and one Republican United States senator, but it seems like eons ago when you look at how things are now. And one other thing I want to note, and my colleague Rick Pearson, who covered the election on Monday, noted in his story, just the drop off in Republican primary turnout this year compared with previous years. There were about 1.3 million Democratic ballots cast in the Democratic primaries this year, when you had no competitive race for governor at the top of the ticket. Obviously, you had a very competitive United States Senate race, but there were fewer than 600,000 GOP ballots cast in the primary statewide. So that just tells you, obviously, there are lots of folks who don't show up for primaries who do show up in the fall, but still, it's when that's the base you're starting from, your base is half as big as the other parties. You've got a really a tough hill to climb.
And a quick preview on the general. 2 years ago, Donald Trump narrowed his margin in terms of what he lost Illinois by statewide, but he only got a couple of thousand votes more or less than he got 4 years previously. The Democratic side, there was a 300,000 vote drop off in terms of between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And if those 300,000 people return to the general election contest, that is another, that's a very ominous sign for the Republicans as we get to the fall elections.
And I think that's the thing I'm left with. 5 or 6 months ago, when Darren Bailey made his announcement, and then we had the primary, and then he kind of, he won and brought in Aaron Del Mar, talking to that point that Dan brought up about, the population center up there in Chicago. But then you got all these national impacts and things. So I think we still have a few months, and I'm sure we'll come back. We'll have to see if the Grogan and the Republicans, I guess, can find some energy and maybe find those voters that have left. We're going to move on to our next topic. Nationally, we're coming upon 1 year of the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. From the Trump administration and the Republican Congress made plenty of sweeping changes. One of the additions, or the things that has kind of come back up, is they put a tax credit in there for people to make donations to educational scholarships, and then the states would have to sign up to be part of that program. 31 states have signed up, mostly Republican-leaning states. Democratic states that lean like ours in Illinois are still trying to decide. Kathy Hochul, Governor Pritzker have all been trying to figure out where they stand on this. Can you kind of give us a little bit of background of what these scholarships are, and then where we stand at the state on accepting these?
Sure. I mean, so this is a program you have to opt in for, that the state has to say, we want to participate, and then people who pay income tax in Illinois are able to essentially get a tax credit if they, against their federal taxes, if they donate money to, basically these are non-for-profit, but a wide variety of what we would broadly call choice options for not attending public school. And so the one side of this is, well, it's federal money. It doesn't cost us anything. And, we're allowing our taxpayers to shift money from the federal treasury to make contributions to various kinds of, non-for-profit, non-public education, K through 12. And so, there's that side of it, kind of, why not? It's just federal money, which, of course, there's no magic money there, but we are, we're changing allocations. You got an editorial from a well-known commentator on Illinois finance, Ralph Martieri, had an editorial saying, no, this is taking public money, and it's not being used for a public purpose. It's being used to subsidize these non-for-profit or religious schools, and who one of the things that would the opponents will always bring up is lots of these places do not take children with disabilities. Very expensive to provide educational opportunities and accommodations for people that have various kinds of disabilities, and so there's this broad philosophical, more philosophical argument about what are we doing here, and if we spend $130 billion in the next decade on this purpose, that's federal money that's not going to Medicaid or other kinds of things that we would like the federal government to be doing in terms of helping states, provide services for their population. And it is likely to be, if, for instance, lightning would strike and the governor was running for president, then this would certainly be something would be brought up in a national campaign about, whose side are you on, sorts of questions. So, there's no quote unquote hurry about this. The feds have not even put out the regulations yet, and I don't think any money shows up until the next fiscal year. So, but it is going to be a flashpoint, absolutely, and for all of those kinds of reasons.
Yeah, and sort of the backdrop here is that Illinois just had a big fight over its own similar program a couple years ago, where public school advocates fought very hard to get the state to sunset the Invest in Kids scholarship program that was enacted under Governor Bruce Rauner, which was a similar state level tax credit for private school scholarships. One of the other bizarre twists we've seen in this story is that Crain's Chicago Business, I believe this week, maybe it was last week, ran an op-ed sent from a federal prison in West Virginia from former Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan, telling Governor Pritzker that he thinks he should opt into this program, which I'm not sure that the governor always loved taking Madigan's advice when he was state party chair or speaker, and I'm not sure how they feel about getting advice from him. The letter from a West Virginia prison. We've also seen disagreements with other Democrats. My colleague Jeremy Gorner a couple months ago, through a Freedom of Information request, got some text messages between the governor and State Comptroller Susana Mendoza, who had written an op-ed for the Tribune's opinion section, encouraging the governor to opt into this program as well. And the governor was, kind of explaining his reservations to her. And one of the things he said was that he didn't want money going to schools that could, in his words, quote, teach values that are racist or anti-Semitic or anti-American. Another underlying interesting thing here is that Darren Bailey, his opponent in the November general election, actually has run a private Christian school in Southern Illinois that was a big flashpoint in the governor's race 4 years ago. So that's underlying all of this as well. It's a very tangled sort of issue.
Kent, I think you're right there that we still have time, and neither side needs to be acting with any quick movements. One of I believe Linda McMahon, the education secretary, testified, and I remember reading that Kathy Hochul was heartened because Ms. McMahon said that states would be able to write some of their rules, that strings weren't going to be attached from a federal level, but they still, like you said, are working on the rules. So I guess we'll, again, just going to get to wait and let everybody, the federal government and those people here in the more progressive states kind of work that out, figure out what's going to happen. Kent, I'm going to stay with you, or Daniel, I'm sorry. Data centers, the governor talked about data centers at his State of the State address, his budget address, talked about limiting tax breaks, and then data centers have really just kind of hit a lot of our headlines. AI, but then the power use and electric use, and the state is or General Assembly is wrestling with some ideas and legislation on that. Can you kind of give us some background on where things stand with this legislation and what we're looking at?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating issue, and one that has changed quite a bit over the 7 years now that the governor has been in office. So there are advocates, environmental advocates largely, and some consumer advocates proposing legislation they've called the Power Act, which is supposed to put some guardrails around data centers, particularly their energy usage, their water usage, things like that, create some more transparency and regulation for those sort of things at the state level. Advocates there have complained a little bit that the governor's office hasn't really been engaged on the issue as much as they would like to see, which is something we've seen over the last few years on some of these higher profile issues. Not to take us off into too much of a tangent, but I think back to the big transit legislation that was happening last spring session and into the fall, where folks who were working on that issue were grumbling a little bit behind the scenes about where's the governor's plan, where's the governor's office on putting forth what they would like to see on this. Eventually, they did come to an agreement on transit in the fall, and the governor's office did get engaged and help sort of seal the deal there. So maybe we'll see something similar here. The governor was asked about data center issues yesterday, and really sort of spoke a lot about the energy legislation that the state has passed over the last several years to try to create more renewable generation and things like that. Lifting the moratorium on nuclear facilities, and so there's some expression of interest there, but what exactly the administration's plan might be isn't really clear publicly at this point. It is interesting because back in 2019, when he was in his first spring session as governor and trying to get a lot of big things done, part of the big budget and capital bill bonanza that they did there on May 31st, that I think, if I recall correctly, kind of bled into June 1st or 2nd, was a deal with Republicans, particularly the House Republicans, who were pushing for, among other things, a tax incentive for data centers, which almost sort of scuttled the deal having Republican support, but then they pulled off an agreement with the governor's support late in the game, and the governor spoke very highly of these tax credits, and then flash forward to this February, like you said, when he's calling for a pause on those credits because of really the explosion in data center development that we've seen and the backlash that we're seeing from the public. Both folks who live in more Democrat supporting suburban areas and also some more rural red Republican areas. It's one of those issues that sort of cuts across party lines. So it's been really fascinating. I think folks are rightly concerned about the impact on their energy bills and just the overall concern for the environment with this much energy being generated. It is one of those interesting issues that sort of cuts across some traditional coalitions. When you see Jed Davis, who's a state lawmaker, fairly conservative guy from north central Illinois, sort of the Starved Rock area of the state, on the same side as the Illinois Jobs or the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition on an issue, it's sort of an interesting, strange bedfellows sort of situation.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It is, this is economic development. It is clean. We're not, we're just putting up buildings, and so there's a lot to be attractive there. We're getting property taxes, but what is fueling this is the artificial intelligence tsunami that is sweeping the country. And there's this tremendous need to be able to aggregate data to feed it into the development and the operation of artificial intelligence. And you've got huge demands on power, what kind of energy you're using, and then when you've got all of these, very sensitive pieces of equipment, questions about how do you cool them. And that gets us into water. And that is, some of this sounds, manageable. And, where I grew up in northern Utah, they are looking at a 40,000 acre data center that if you play it out over however long it takes to develop it, you'd be talking to exceeding the amount of energy the state of Utah uses on an annual basis, with a state that is deathly afraid that the Great Salt Lake is going to dry up, and then the wind is going to start blowing around centuries worth of toxic material, laying on the dry seabed now. And so it is, where you say, well, it's small, we got time, we can work on it, but this is being driven by a huge development within the nation's economy that has implications for, again, and huge environmental implications. So we don't have, this is not kind of we can take it easy and see what shakes out sort of thing. This seems to be something that is going to get more and more urgent. So we shall see. The General Assembly sometimes, however members that we have these days, the 170 whatever, are not terribly light on their feet when they try to, quickly address these kinds of things.
You're right, and I am struck by how it crosses party lines, and everybody seems to want to stop, and I guess we'll let it play out. I'm not sure how it's going to end up. We got another week and a half for it to figure out. We've got about 2.5 minutes left. I wanted to finish on a story, Dan, that you did for the Tribune. You looked at a 2024 law before I came here to the state, so I'm kind of getting up to speed on this, about reporting requirements for nonprofits and their demographics. In about a minute and a half, can you kind of tell us, not to give us too short shrift, but we can send people to the article too.
Sure. Yeah, this was a sort of building on previous legislation that had been passed years ago, making the governor's office disclose the demographics of the folks that it appoints to various state boards and commissions. And then Chris Welch, the current Illinois House Speaker, before he was Speaker, passed a bill that required publicly traded companies that are headquartered here in Illinois to report the demographics of their boards of directors. So what folks in the nonprofit sector wanted to do is make large nonprofits that distribute lots of, grants of $1 million or more to other nonprofits, large influential organizations in the state, also disclose their demographics so folks could see, whether these influential organizations were representative of the communities that they serve, and the requirement was put in place that they do that after they file their paperwork with the Attorney General's office every year. And based on a tip that I received from a source, went and looked and saw that very few of them had done that. By now it kicked in 2025, so they should have all had to file one annual report with the AG's office. And at the time when we first looked, like only 3 of the top 20 had actually filed anything. Some blamed the Pritzker administration for being slow to roll out the guidelines of how they were supposed to report. There's a lawsuit from an anti-DEI group, which was also joined by Trump's Justice Department, challenging the lawsuit. Some folks pointed that. Some folks just flat out said, this email that you sent us with these questions about it is the first that we're hearing of this issue. So it was really interesting, and it speaks to the way in which sometimes lawmakers, when they try to, with good intentions, address an issue, the way legislation is built doesn't really build in a mechanism for enforcement or for follow-up or making sure that folks actually, follow the letter of the law.
And I was struck by that, how there were a couple of organizations that are like, your email was the one that prompted to them. But people can go find this on the Chicago Tribune website. Go read it. It's a great read. Kent and Dan, thank you for joining us. That's it for this week's edition of Capitol View.